Well, hello and welcome to Association Transformation. We are, I don't know how many of these we've done, and we keep taking on new and different topics facing the association world. And I can say world because we are a transatlantic conversation with Andrew of Consorts over in the UK and myself, Brewer Pratt Solutions here in the United States. I'm Elisa Pratt, and my partner today in crime is Andrew Chamberlain. Andrew?
Hello, everybody. It feels like you say we've lost count. It feels like hours. It feels like days of podcast. In fact, it feels like weeks we've been podcasting together, like
Stop
constantly.
It. You've aged. Your ulcer, yeah.
Yeah, my ulcer. That's right. I thought you were going to start by my age again. Let's not go down that route. Not this early in the pod.
You're going to scare our guests away.
Yeah, I know.
Don't scare them away. You know this is a safe place for us to talk issues and topics and challenges and mistakes and victories that happen in the association space. And today I'm excited to have a guest, a longtime friend of mine, Mr. Kevin Madden, Chief Financial King of Financial Officers. I don't know, the best CFO I know in the business. And it's not the sexiest topic, I'll admit, but Kevin, we're excited to have you today. And I want to give CFOs some credit here, especially in these last, 6-8 months. This has not been the easiest time to be a CFO. And I want to bring you to the forefront and recognize you and all like you in the CFO space.
I love how you... Sorry, Kevin. I love how you totally lowered our listeners' expectations there, but it's not the sexiest, is it?
Well,
I think I could jump over that bar. I feel good about that. So thanks, Lisa, and thank you for on behalf of all CFOs for recognizing the work that we're doing for the association community in these challenging times.
Yeah, underappreciated clearly. And, finance is not a top. I mean, we've talked about everything from governance to membership to virtual events. None of these are really sexy topics. Let's be honest.
I was going to say, please tell me that this is better than governance. You got to give financial people more credit than governance.
Governance is my favorite topic, actually.
Exactly.
After finance.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew.
But I'm usually pretty good at telling when I don't have any money in the bank. So I'm like,
Well, this is the time. This is one of the times when everyone kind of sticks their heads up and looks for the finance person, right? We kind of toil in anonymity when times are good and dollars are flowing and everyone's kind of humming along. But when crises pop up, that's when people start looking for the CFO, right? That's the time people are starting to pay attention.
Because clearly you're a magician who can just magic cash out of the air.
Right. The cash I gotta turn around and grab out of that tree that's been growing in the backyard those years with the dollar bills hanging down from it. This is the time to pull it down, right?
Well, and I think these last, we talk about crisis as an opportunity in many cases, but at the same time, I think it's exposed a lot of weaknesses that organizations may have been able to gloss over. And finance, of course, is one of them. Yeah, I think organizations assume, hey, we're following our resource or our reserve policy. We've got 6 months in the bank. We're great. We can weather anything. And I think we know it's not as simple as that. And people have been put to the test.
Right.
What is the CFO world talking about?
I think that's one of those things, you touch on that reserve policy, and I think that is one of these things that's been highlighted out of this, is that for years, everyone's kind of used those benchmarks of, is it 3 months reserves, is it 6 months reserves? And 2-3 years ago, we started talking in the association community, is there a risk assessment that needs to be done to really get your reserves to the right level based on the risks of your revenue streams and the risk of your operation? And I even tackled this with my budget and finance committee, and this was 2 years ago. We tried to get them to start thinking about this, and one of the things I said to them, honestly, at the time is, what happens, for example, if you can't have your trade show one year because something prevents everyone from attending that event, right? Oh no, that'll never happen. That'll never be in front of us. And then here we are in 2020, and that's exactly what has happened, right? And so I think you really have to think about those reserves, not just on a how many months do we have, but what really happens if a revenue stream gets shut off suddenly, right? And now we've got to adapt and pivot, and your reserves are there to help you make the pivot without cratering your staff and your resources immediately. That's what they're there for. Are they going to be enough to make that transition?
Yeah. I don't think, arguably, I don't think the way you describe reserves, I completely understand and completely recognize, but I'm not sure as many chief execs as or boards recognize reserves in that context. Because what
Right.
I love that. Yes, absolutely, they are supposed to be this so we can pivot, not so that we can just tread water until the ship just goes under. And I think sometimes, I get a sense that the boards or leadership teams say, I don't want to single out just the board. I think leadership teams think that the reserves are basically the violin on the Titanic. We're just going to keep on fiddling that until
Right.
it's all done. Then what can we do to get? I mean, other than this real life
Oh,
case study where we're all now
yeah.
going through, how do we get our directors and our C-suite colleagues to appreciate that actually the reserves they're not just they're nice to have; they're absolutely fundamentally critical to have, and to be
Right.
used the right
And
way.
in the association world, it really becomes a political item, right? You have boards who look and they say, every dollar that you're holding in the bank is a dollar of my
Oh,
member dues that you have not spent over time, right? And
uh,
really what you should be doing is giving that money back to me or holding nothing in the bank because there's really
yeah,
no need for you to have reserves. Or sure, if you have reserves, it could be some minimal amount, but come on, you guys really aren't going to be affected, and you get 2 or 3 months of reserves in the bank, you'll be fine. That's adequate enough, right? So there's a lot of education, and that's where I think this has opened eyes to I think what people on the leading edge have been thinking about for a while, which is there's a risk assessment to this, and you really have to understand your business. And sure, if you're 90% member dues and your members can ride out kind of a downturn in their economy and not, think about how they're going to pay their dues to you. Sure, you've got low risk and you probably can have a lower revenue now amount. But if you're in a trade show business or you're in a stream of business where you've got competitors, you really need to kind of understand how a massive shift can rapidly affect you, and do you have the money in place to make that change?
Right. And the money is really just your opportunity. The money just buys you time. Reserve just
Right,
buy you time to make
yeah,
decisions with the
yeah.
little bit of information you have. When
right.
Corona first hit here in the United States, Kevin was part of an association executive group that we brought together to vent, to commiserate, and
Commiserate,
one of the
right?
things right, one of the things that he talked about, and I think his group really got in front of quickly because they knew their large event and main revenue streams were going to be threatened, was forecasting, was
Mm,
scenario
Right,
planning based on the
right,
information that was available along the way. And I think that's something you have to get really good at really fast, to
right.
give your board the information that you have and put it in
Yep.
put it in terms that they can then use to make decisions.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that's kind of, talking at least about that group and talking to my peers, I think that's something that there definitely has been there's definitely a shift in the skill set of the C-suite, right, of the CFO suite. Can you model accurately? Can you understand what's changed and how it's going to affect you? And we started from the first week with multiple scenarios on everything from our largest in-person event to our member dues structure to our impact on our affiliate network, and just started thinking kind of what if scenarios and kind
Mm,
of take them all down, and got the board and the leadership very comfortable very quickly that we had our arms around what the worst case scenario was. We laid it out for them. We said, here are the things that constitute worst case, and here's the extreme of the losses if all that comes together. Here's where we can pull back to minimize that. And then here's the balance that we need you to be able to be comfortable of. We're going to lean on the reserves to get us through this pivot as we reset ourselves for 2021. And I think that got us a lot of credibility with our board in terms of really grasping and understanding the problem and then being able to move off of it quickly.
Does this, however, not just demonstrate, I'm going to be controversial here, the one dimension or the two dimensionalism of the membership sector? Because we have been, as an industry, so heavily reliant on another industry, i.e. the event sector, to sustain us, that as soon as that has faltered and begun and shut down, therefore we have. And does it not? Do you not think that it just demonstrates how that we've not been particularly sophisticated, not just in our ability to forecast, but our ability to understand how to diversify income, and to mitigate those risks through forecasting, not merely putting cash in the bank. I just get a sense that you see the associations who have strengthened their position, or have, at the very least, continue to demonstrate their value proposition throughout the pandemic, have been adept at demonstrating that actually their value doesn't just come through, bums on seats, turn up at a conference, turn up at an annual meeting, turn up at an event, etc., etc. But arguably, in my opinion, I think, though, we are pointing to something much more significant than just the inability to perceive and to appreciate the value of forecasting and the value of reserves management and indeed investment management. I think it's something much, much broader than that. I mean, that's just my opinion. I don't know if you see it the same, or you feel I'm touching on something there.
Yeah. I think, Andrew, I think you're spot on. I think that one of the big things that's been my experience in 20 years now of association management is I've always kind of led the charge that says you have to constantly reinvest and constantly think about where the next revenue stream comes from, right? If you just take that successful event, take the money out of it, take the profits, throw them in the bank, and you don't think about where to reinvest, that show's just going to eventually die off, right? And a competitor is going to come in, or the herd's going to shift and go somewhere else, right? And you're going to be left flat-footed. Yeah. But if every year you're taking that money, if you're taking some of that profit and you're putting it back into either how do I make this event different or more valuable so people stay with me, or what's the next revenue stream that I can create a value for my members off of, and constantly reinventing themselves. Those are the organizations that are successful in the long run. The groups that are just like in the corporate world, the groups that are just kind of filtering off the profits and putting them in the bank, they're eventually going to die out, right? Same thing in the association world. If you're not constantly thinking about how to change your model and think about how you provide your value to your members, eventually your members are going to go away.
But do you think people are, going back to your point earlier on, do you think it's a case, because the reserves issue, for example, is so highly politicized, do you think that is then directly linked to this inability to pivot and to be more, strategic and more ambitious and creative? Do you think the politics rests there as well?
One of the hardest things I think about association management is the fact that you're working through a board of volunteers, right? And volunteers come on and they're on for a short period of time and they move off, and nobody wants anything to happen in their year, right? They don't want the bad year, they don't want the bad investment results, right? They don't want anything that looks bad on their year, so they tend to be very risk adverse, right? And because they don't want that downside, right? And so I think that does create a political pressure when you say, well, wait a minute, I know you don't want anything bad, but we've got to pivot here. We're going to use some of those reserves to try this over here, and creating that mentality of try and fail, because that's what happens a lot of times. You have to have that, and you've got to get your board comfortable with that, because if they're not, you're never going to get anywhere, because nobody hits 1,000 on these new ideas, right?
Yeah. Boards are anything but experimental in most cases.
Which is ironic. Go on, Kevin. Go on.
Yeah, I'll say that the groups that have done it have got the boards they've trained their boards to be entrepreneurial. They've trained them not to be risk adverse. Those are the ones that have really, if you look at the groups that have really been successful, that's the key, is you got to get that board kind of thinking like entrepreneurs.
Well, on some of the boards that I'm working with, we are approaching this almost as a venture capitalist. Where are the seed programs that you can put a little bit of money in, and then as they demonstrate themselves, certain things fall away and certain things expand and evolve, and you continue your investment until you find that aha idea. and it's something that you then bring into the fold. But you're right, getting them to think that way, especially, we've just scratched the surface with their fiduciary responsibilities, and then you want them to be venture capitalists. It's a stretch for many of the groups.
And you know what really is a key to that, coming back to the CFO side, is they've got to have a CFO and a finance function that they trust, right? Yes. That's going to give them the full story, that's going to tell them the good and the bad, and that they know the hands are on the wheel and they've got this thing under control, right? Because the minute there's not a confidence level about the accuracy or the transparency of the numbers, that's when they start really pulling back and say, well, we can't trust this, so we're really not going to move anywhere.
So what does that require then for kind of the CFO-COO relationship? Yeah, I think you rarely see one successful without the other.
Right, and so not only in terms of with your board, but working internally in your C-suite as well, right? If that CFO and COO aren't on the same step and in alignment with each other, this is going to end badly, right? I've been really fortunate in my career to work with some great COOs who kind of understood how to leverage the numbers expertise that was being brought to the table to help make their program successful. And of course, if you can wear both hats at the same time, then you're just arguing with yourself. That really is when it gets to be a great experience, right?
So when you get to the end of the argument, you disagree with yourself.
Right. Then you know you have a problem.
That's right.
Right. When I'm answering myself, that's when I really know it's time to stop and go home,
right? So how given what everyone's just gone through, from the CFO trenches, as the CFO, what's the advice? A lot of organizations don't have CFOs. They're too small. They don't have that capacity. What's the number one financial takeaway from 2020? Is it investment policy? Is it reserve policy? What should people be changing?
I think number one, first and foremost, you got to look at that reserve policy, and you got to ask yourselves: are we really set up right to be able to handle the next pivot and the next crisis, right? Because if our reserves aren't set to an appropriate level, we're going to go through another cycle where we will have recovery and success, right? Like we've been through over the last 7 to 10 years for most groups. That's going to come again. But if we're not taking advantage during that time to get our reserves to the right level, then we're not going to be positioned for the inevitable downturn that will follow after it. So I think that's one. I think the other thing that comes out super critical for organizations is you've got to have a CFO function that can help you accurately budget and forecast the next cycle, right? Because we're all in our 2021 budget cycles now. We're all tackling, we're trying to sit there and think about with our crystal balls, well, what's a realistic revenue number look like for 2021, right? Yeah. I'm with an association that generates a third of its revenue from trade shows and events. How many of those are we going to have in 2021, right? Where are they going to be, and who's going to show up? And that, that revenue is what drives all of the actions of the association. So if you don't get that revenue number right, you're going to be playing catch up all through 2021.
But if I put my chief executive hat on and say, but it's all right because budgets, well, they're just budgets. It's not actuals, is it? It's not, it doesn't matter if we go over our budget. It's just, it's just there to guide us. That was always a common discussion we had around the board table with my directors a long time ago, was that but budgets don't really matter, do they? They're just an indication. They're not really a target.
Yeah, I think they're a benchmark that provides you value in terms of measurement, right? So they're set an expectation for the coming year. So yes, you're going to go over them or you're going to run under them, but why? What's the story behind why that happened? What did we think was going to happen that now changed us? And more importantly, now that change has been identified and you've got a reason for a change, what does that mean going forward, right? And you want your budgets, at least I personally, I use them strictly as benchmarking tools, not as punishment tools. We're not here to beat people up for going over their budget, but we also are a business, and despite our nonprofit moniker gives us a tax designation, not an operating mentality, right? We've got to put some money in the bank. We've got to keep sustainable, right? So there's only so long that we could say, well, we'll just keep spending it and overrun our budget. So To me, it puts a benchmark in place and a measure in place, and kind of gets everyone pointed to, okay, where are we running? But Andrew, to
Yeah.
your point, the day that budget is printed, it's dated and irrelevant, right? Because
Yeah.
it was built on a set of assumptions, and the day after it's done, something's going to change that's going to make
Yeah.
those assumptions
Yeah.
irrelevant. So then, what happens the day after that, for how you adjust your model to respond to that?
And I really like your point there about it's a tax designation, not a mindset. We are not for profit, but we are also not for loss, and we should not be out there looking at every opportunity to empty the bank accounts as soon as somebody raises an eyebrow. But I think also, for me, even before, I absolutely agree with you, by the way. I'm not disagreeing at all. I think
No,
before investment policies and before budgets and before we understand our forecasting and our reserves, I actually think the board has to go right. First of all, I think the board has to go right back to understanding its appetite for risk. Because I think how I may understand risk compared to how you or Elisa may understand risk could vary wildly, and yet we could all say, "Oh, we're all risk takers." But unless you've had that explicitly discussed and recorded and outlined and aggregated, it's
right.
it means nothing. But I think also went to your point as well about context and being able to budget appropriately and to be able to forecast. That also then requires the CFO to retain that strategic what's the word, that strategic context, to be able to understand as well where the association is, where it wants to go. And too often I feel, I don't know if this is, if you've seen this, Elisa, but too often I've seen the CFO sidelined because, well, he's got his head in the books, he just needs his calculator, that's all he does, and he'll tell us if we're right or wrong once a quarter when we have a board meeting. But that's not it, is it? If you want a C-suite team that has a holistic view of the world, then the CFO also has to have that understanding as well, I would
Right.
argue.
Yeah, your CFO can't just be your backstop to
No.
come in when things hit the red.
Yeah.
And I think that, the no margin, no mission has to be the mentality of every board member. But, one thing that Kevin is great about, and I really enjoyed when he and I had the opportunity to work together, was his investment in key performance indicators and using that as a way to almost sneak in financial markers
I like
throughout
it.
the organization and
Right.
make them, they were owned by the department, they had financial context, they were revenue indicators as well, and the whole organization, that's how they were measured. Each department wasn't just siloed and didn't just care about their success, but the whole organization had KPIs and they were very financial. And that was
Yep.
a way that I think he brought himself off the sidelines and helped the organization see some of that stuff.
I think it's absolutely right, Elisa, and thanks for the compliment. I think I think that's something I have done really well with this organization, is created some accountability beyond just how much money was in the bank and how much revenue was made, right? Because that was kind of the mentality when I first walked in the door. And it's not just financial benchmarks, it's other program benchmarks, and it becomes really critical, especially for your programs that don't generate a lot of revenue. For government affairs, for example, the organization I'm with is very heavy government affairs, does a lot of lobby, wants to help members, advocate for its members on the Hill. How do you measure that, right? I mean, if it's clearly not dollars and cents, because there's no dollar, there's a lot of dollars out, but there's no dollars in, other than maybe member dues. But one of the things I started talking with the GA head about early on when I came back is, what are the program benchmarks that help us tell the story of success, right? So if it's grassroots efforts, how many people are we touching when we go out and we say to our members, hey, we need a letter on X issued to your congressman, right? Or how many key members of contacts do I have that I know I can pick up the phone and call and get through onto the Hill and get my voice heard, right? Or how many political action committee member contributions am I receiving? So it's those types of benchmarks that help the board understand not just are there dollars in the bank, but how do we know the investment we're making in these dollars is actually paying off, right? And that's not always, as I said, in dollars and cents. It's in other measurable tactics then you got to help the board understand. And I do think that's one of where CFOs can add value, is demonstrating that it's not just how did the dollars go against budget and why did we go over or under, but really understanding the story behind the numbers and making those kinds of connections.
Right. Kevin Madden, the chief quantifier. Chief quantifier of value throughout the building.
CQO.
I like
I've
that.
never
I
heard
haven't
that
heard
one.
CQO. That's kind of an interesting one.
Well, as someone who works with boards and staff on strategic plans, my hope is that there's that mindset for KPIs and quantifiers
Yeah.
that are tied to your strategic objectives that then get tied to budget, and that there's this connectivity of everyone rowing in the same direction and understanding what success looks like.
Right.
And that's where, whether it's financial or KPI driven, you need that proof of concept for the board.
The danger CFOs fall into, in my opinion, is they become the department of no, right? They become the place that where things go to stop and die, right? And the only time their head pops up is when somebody stepped over a budget line or somebody didn't get an approval for something, right? And they're just constantly seen as an inhibitor to progress instead of being part of the solution, right? So I think CFOs have to work really hard to get out of their office, partner with their peers and their department heads to understand where they're going and how finance can help drive that and move that forward rather than just inhibiting or being seen as a stopper inside the building.
Yeah, we've talked good and bad cop many a time, and you hate seeing one of your C-suite executives put into that, any one of those personas.
Yeah. And it goes back to my point I make about the fact that you want your C-suite to have everybody can't know everything about everything. But what you absolutely need is a balanced C-suite. That, again, you speak about departments not working in silos, but you need your C-suite not working in silos either. Yes, they have their specialisms, absolutely, and that's primarily why they're appointed. But they absolutely need to recognise that they're not sitting at that C-suite table as individuals, and to be able to effectively or to affect change effectively, they absolutely need to have that much, much broader appreciation of financial realities, operational realities, membership realities, political realities, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think, I would, and I think to go, I would love to see more integration of the CFO in the strategic planning process, and in the in the day-to-day with the CEO, the COO in the decision-making processes as well, because I think too often they are left out. And the amount of times I've sat in board meetings and you sat there and there's senior execs, and then they invite the CFO to come in sort of for 10 minutes, and you're like, well, why isn't he or she here from the start? It's crazy.
Yeah, Andy, I totally agree. And I think this is a point where CFOs have to put on an assertive hat. I think we are by nature introverts, right? I mean, your typical accountant, your stereotypical accountants, right, are not the most extroverted people, right? And so if we're not invited to step forward, our tendency is to step back, right? And so I think where CFOs have to put their hat on, especially in the association world, is say, look, I've got to be in the room. Right, I have to have a voice, even if it's just to help you understand the numbers. And more importantly, I'm not going to understand the numbers if I don't understand the programs and the thoughts about where the directions you're heading. If you're excluding me from those conversations, then we're going to reach a point down the road where my forecasts aren't right, or because I don't have that information to know where you're pivoting, or you've stepped off a cliff and you didn't know it because you didn't have good financial data to support that decision. And so I think CFOs really have to assert themselves and really push to be in those conversations to give that balanced perspective and fill out that room, as you so well pointed out.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say introverts because the language I'm hearing is complete opposite to introvert. I'm hearing venture capitalism, exert our influence, be part of the decision making process. I'm hearing good, positive. It's all good. And there's nothing you've said here this afternoon or this morning for you. As a chief exec, I wouldn't sit there and shudder and think, "Oh my God, the CFO wants to be talking." Oh no. What you're saying just makes sense. So I only wish we had longer to talk about it because actually, I think, I think you're right. I think this puts governance in the shade. Actually, I think this is now my favorite subject.
The
Oh, look
active-
at that. Although a success.
Ask anyone who knows me. Spending money is my forte. Honestly, if only I could make it the way I can spend it.
CFO,
That's
the
all of us.
activist CFO.
That's it.
That is
And we've come up with a new job as well. CQO. Look, we're
I
totally
like that.
trademark that. You trademark that one, okay? So can
No,
we
but
just
that-
take this? Go on, Elisa. Go on. We're going to
No,
say before I wrap up.
that was why I was so eager to get Kevin, because I think there is that other side to CFOs. There's that activism. There's that intentional, effort, and the need for balance, and the real opportunity and potential they present when given the voice, when given the space. And Kevin's been a prime example of that in all of our interactions and in all the organizations he's worked with. And COVID's the chance. COVID's the wake-up call for organizations to see that this position can be so much more than just a C-level accountant.
It's interesting because I'm thinking by the time listeners are listening to this, it might not be COVID that our colleagues in America are thinking about actually as being the pivotal point. I think this might be going out after the election, so who knows?
We
where
don't
you
talk
guys
politics or religion on our podcast, Andrew.
Well, I do think though. I do think that what they will be hearing is they'll be thinking about 2021 and what is it, a recovery year or a bunker down year, right? And so let's get more clarity on that as this starts to evolve. I think for most groups, our group, as I thought about it, thinking about where my mindset was 6 months ago and thinking about where it is today. Two different things, and stuff I thought 6 months ago would happen, has not been anywhere close to reality. No. And so, it really does point out the need to be able to forecast multiple scenarios and think through those things and kind of bring all the different potentials to the table, because 2021 is going to be another wild ride, I think.
And that's something to look forward to, isn't it?
Right, isn't it? There's your optimistic, happy CFO for you, right?
Well, thank you for sharing your voice with us this afternoon, Kevin. I really enjoyed meeting you. I've enjoyed chatting with you, and I hope we have an opportunity to catch up again. Yeah, let's catch up again in 2021 and reflect on where we've got to. I think that would be fascinating. Oh God, I can't even believe it's just like a few short months away.
Around the corner.
Exactly.
Year before we know it.
Oh,
I enjoyed speaking with both of you guys today too. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Kevin. You're very welcome, and I hope that everyone has enjoyed listening to today's podcast. If, in fact, you have enjoyed listening to our musings and you want to suggest a subject that we talk about, or indeed if you want to join us on the podcast, then do please tweet us at Association Transformation or email us hello@yourconsort.com, and Elisa and I will draw upon our networks and try and put together a podcast that we hope that we know that you'll find helpful and worth listening to. From whenever you get your podcasts, Apple, Google, Amazon, Deezer, whatever that is, but who knew? But we're on there as well. Add Association Transformation to your favorites so that you never miss an episode. Do you know what? I've done it again, Lisa. I can't remember what our tagline is at the end when we can what do I say to people? It's not just goodbye, is it?
It's so inspiring that you forget. Until next time, this is our sign off. This is our, reporter friend. Until next time, stay well and put your members and mission first.
I feel like we should be saying, stay classy, San Diego.
No. The Association Transformation Podcast is brought to you by Brewer Pratt Solutions and Consort Strategies in support of the Institute of Association Leadership.